All right.
Good evening. Good evening. Tom, am I working? Is the system working?
I hear you.
Ah, good. Okay, yeah.
Yes,
Well,
you
my
are
computer is
on.
broken, but I just had a 2-hour trip from the city, so.
Oh, trains
That was
slowed
bad.
right down with the snow, huh?
I'm sorry?
The trains slowed right down with the snow.
I really don't know. I had the car in there. I had to drive in for, I had to go in for something today. And I'll tell you, it wasn't trafficy coming back, but it was really not comfortable driving. It was 2 hours, but it was just, and it wasn't crowded, but it was slow. And it wasn't a pleasant feeling because it was a lot of on 95 and Bruckner. They hadn't cleared anything, and it was somewhat heavy.
So we are live and recording now.
Okay, I think we should hold off formal opening until oh, there's Seamus. Okay. We've got Andrew, we've got David. That's as full a house as we're going to get. So evening, Seamus. That's clock is struck 7:30. We've got everyone we're going to get. I think move to open the meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And we're open. For the folks watching at home, we always appreciate your concern with public affairs. If for any reason you're unable to continue watching Zoom, you can watch the live stream on YouTube or call in. The numbers have been posted with the agenda, and we thank you for your participation. We have no applicant items tonight, so we're going to move right to the administrative items. The first one is the LWRP, where we left that at the work session. We had discussed next steps to fill in both scrubbing the red line for a few things that just need sort of proofread help and that's sort of administrative cleanup. And then there were substantive issues that needed things added, and we've got to prioritize what we're going to do, figure out who's going to do it.
Yep.
Amber, you're gonna see what we had surviving from that list. Where are we at?
Yes. So the list that William had shared the last meeting prior to the last work session, Steve and I were able to review and update. So I can share my screen now. We had a couple of points that we wanted to clarify with you guys. And once we get clarification on those, I'll circulate that document with the commissioners. So let me just pull that Word doc up. I have so many windows open, I have to search for it. Here we go. All right. So you'll see we went through, and it's largely the same structure, but we added a little bit more refinement to the structure here, as well as some tentative dates that we think work for our purposes and schedule. We'd like to hear what the commission's expectations are. And Steve, please feel free to jump in here. But the first heading is for us to conduct an initial review of what we have in terms of the LWRP as compared to the 13 Long Island Sound Coastal Management Program policies, which we understand from Department of State that the neighboring communities are in adherence with, and Mamaroneck is not, because we created our policies prior to the formation of the 13 Long Island Sound Coastal Management Program policies. So we just want to review that carefully and see if the question is whether we should align to those policies, and whether or not, with AKRF's input, that would be the recommendation from the planning department. It's something that it depending on the nature of that content, may require more or less changes, the LWRP. So moving from there, we can then foresee how much or how significant a change that would require.
I don't want to derail you, but before we move off of that, my understanding from sort of the oral history handed down in the commission and discussions was that the first go round of drafting the revised LWRP, the committee considered and rejected the idea of conforming more closely to the 13 policy format. So, I mean, I guess the question for us is first, do we retain the right to just say, we like the 44 as they were originally articulated back in the, in the era of enabling statutes that created these things in the 70s? Do we like that format and want to stick with it? Do we have the right to do that if we think it's more appropriate for our community?
Right.
Yeah, my recollection was on our last one of our more recent meetings, Doreen had said exactly that, who I think it's someone who's been around this for a long time, which is that we don't have to do that. So obviously confirmation would be good, because since this is a little bit of oral history. My view would be the group working on this in the timeline now with a eye towards just getting it finished. I'd like to personally look at those 13 Long Island Sound policies and just make sure that there's nothing of value to be extracted from it. But probably my thought would be to maintain, the basis of our own LWRP that we've had for a long time with 44 policies, and only take what might be of value in there.
Yeah, and my understanding as well is that, and we can seek confirmation, I guess if we can check with a legal department at some point in the near future. But my understanding as well is that we do not have to. The question for us is whether or not it may be, to our benefit to do so. But as Seamus, as you're saying, perhaps there are elements that we would like to extract without necessarily undertaking a whole overhaul of the LWRP as it is now.
And I think probably just to finish off on that point, so Martin and I have convened really just in the last couple of days, call it the working group on this. And so we've traded some thoughts back and forth on additional items. Maybe one thing that we could do is have, Amber, you, Martin, I, and whoever else is relevant meet even before our next work session to progress a few of these things. But I think that we're going to ultimately create an entire legal work stream. My view of it from looking at the red line is it's not going to be extensive. But I know that there are, in the back of the red line that we have, some chapter 240 code interactions with the LWRP. So I think probably one thing that we should do is develop a list of focused items that we want council to review, and then ask them to do so. And that one,
is everybody hearing the vibration in Seamus's audio, or is it just me?
Yeah, I am. There's a warble.
Yeah, let me try to switch off my headphones, but that was all I had to say for the moment. So hold on.
Yeah, I think that all sounds good. And, some of this list was also just, I'm new to this as well. So just kind of jumping in and kind of assessing what it is that people are looking to update, what doesn't need to be updated. So it's sort of just us wrapping our head around that. We were thinking between now and the next work session, but as you said, Seamus, kind of having a regroup so we can build up our institutional knowledge on what's been done in the past and everything. That sounds like a good idea. And we can build off of that from there.
Yeah, I derailed Amber by asking a question though. Go ahead and pick it up.
Sure. No, this is good.
Questions are good.
Notes to circle back on. And we had set the next work session as our objective in getting that squared away. It seemed like something we can, review and determine and assess what would be needed between now and then. to that end. So perhaps we can circle back with the commission in the mix for that. As well, in that same time frame and timeline, we'd like to revisit the maps and look into what is needed. So AKRF has a pretty substantial GIS team that they can lend services to create any maps that would need to be created. The question is really evaluating what data we have, what data they need, what data we have, and what the missing gap is there that we may need to reach out to the county for, if at all, and evaluating what is working with the existing maps and what perhaps is missing. So that's really just looking into what's needed there.
Yeah, and let me know, sorry to jump in, but maybe we just deal with this along the way. Is the audio any better there without being on the headphones?
Yes.
Yeah,
Great.
much better. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and I think probably what we'd want to do there, and again, I'm thinking of maybe one smaller group that meets between the next work session is I think it's going to be helpful for us to see a list of the maps, just however many dozen there are. I don't think it's a completely insane amount. I mean, I think if we can just list the maps and decide each of them, just say, is this something that we want to consider updating or not? I think anything where we can create an inventory of actionable steps and then knock them off is going to be helpful. So I think maps is probably one of the longer lead items here, would be my guess. So developing that list and then trying to prioritize it and progress the updates is what I have in mind there.
Okay, I can go ahead and do that if you want. If you want me to take that up.
Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
I would like to reemphasize, I think I agree with Seamus that we could possibly meet in between now and the work session to move some of these things along as well. I don't think we have to wait until the 12th to get things moving.
Oh, sure. I think the idea was to have this completed by the 12th so that we to move on to the next stage by then. Great. So from there, that will determine what actual content needs to be updated. So that's why you'll see this next bullet is scheduled for the following work session of February 9th. So that would be drafting the actual content changes, if any, and creating any maps as necessary, which after phase 1, if you will, we'll know how, we'll have a better sense of whether or not that's a realistic time frame. But it seems like it should be to have that completed by.
Yeah, can I just say real quickly, if I remember properly, the wildlife inventory was from the 80s.
Right.
That was something that needed to be updated, and that work was done. I have to check my file, but there is a more recent list that was already compiled. I think it's just a matter of incorporating it.
I think Martin's Martin, do you want to speak to that? I think you have the ability to get access to some of that list, and we can see how thorough it is for what it would need to be.
Yeah, I mean, if it's coming through the Marine Education Center, one of my coworkers at Save the Sound, Peter Linderoth, works with the Marine Education Center, as well as Kyle there. We could reach out to and see if they have the updated list.
Yeah.
Or
Also-
we should also maybe ask them for a list that they might have, because they might have something that's even more contemporary than what's floating out there.
Yeah, it might even be more comprehensive. To your other point, Andrew, about stuff being from the 80s, in our quick back and forth, there are other things in there that are like 1980s information as well. One thing that it talks about on page 48 is in 1984, marine activity contributions to the local economy were estimated at more than 18 million annually. So can we get a more current number on that than 1984? I think a lot of the references in this document are going to be from the 80s. So I think it needs a full read through, and any references to any data from the 80s should in some way be updated to the current data.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Amber. I'll follow you.
Sure. 2 points to that end. One is you'll see that, and I'm realizing now as I'm looking at it that it's maybe in the wrong place, but reviews by other experts that we, feel should certainly weigh in on this. We've identified as definitely needed. The second point is really Steve and myself, Steve and I, having that started in the last really, joining this conversation in the last couple of months. We're trying to get up to speed with what actually has been reviewed. At what stage is this draft in terms of these additional reviews? So it sounds like there was a list at some point that identified things that needed to be updated here. I'm not certain if I have that list and on our files and on the staff end. So if there's anything of that nature that you could share with us, this would be helpful for us getting us to speed.
So Seamus, I'm going to pitch this back to you. I'm sorry I jumped in here, but I think this is where you and I were talking about that we could go through the document and create that list.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think I've started that. So what I'm aware of as the inventory is some emails and correspondence, mostly from Doreen Roney, who just rotated off of this commission. But I think the key document is a red line of the LWRP that has comments and red line marks in it of open items. I've already done an inventory of at least the red line items that are open. I have that and I'll share it with you. That's what Martin and I have been corresponding on. There's probably additional items that just a read of the clean document itself to try to identify references to the 80s like Martin was talking about. I think the critical next step that I don't believe exists, but is what we're talking about and is probably something that the next meeting, if we do that and then followed by the work session should allow for, is we don't need a markup of this big document at this point. We need an issues list. We need a list of the items that are open that need to be closed out with a responsible party, a process. And so if it's creating a map, we have a list of the maps that Steve has already offered to create. I have the open items from the red line. We'll go through and compile, references to the 80s. We just need a complete, I think, issues list that we just knock the items off, integrate into the draft, and then it's at the point where, we have a fully updated draft. And I think along the way is where we'd probably get expert input just on one narrow topic. And I don't think we need to belabor this all in this meeting, but Andrew's good point on species. I would think that's as simple as we had a list from 1984, which was a great year, by the way. And an environmental consultant could probably tell us all of these species are still theoretically or definitely here. So boom, that part of the list is good. And then we go to what the Marine Education Center and others have of maybe new species that have been seen or migrated into the area and so on. And then we add to the list from there if there's no subtractions. And then, that item is hopefully addressed to the best of our ability. So that the issues list is what I'm thinking is the critical next step.
I think if at all possible, it would be helpful as well for us, just for our purposes, to understand a timeline of what this commission has seen and what environmental review has already taken place. And that's something that I can try to find out on the staff end here. But if to your awareness, what stage that's at in terms of environmental review, I think it would be helpful for us to know.
Yeah, unless anyone knows off the top, I don't. So I think we could research and look into it. Everything that's compiled into that red line of the LWRP, obviously we have, and then I don't know what the source of additional information would be.
Sure. Okay. Well, we can definitely start from there. And then, yes, just lastly, finalizing the actual document and, the copy edits and the design aspects for, readability, at which point we would have a finalized document and would then proceed into what I assume to be public comments and adoption processes regarding this that we'll have to get back to you on the specifics of as soon as we can pull that together.
Yeah, I have nothing more to really say. I think this is great and helpful. This is exactly what I was thinking of that we looked at originally. It's nice to have more structure on it. And I think, we can probably create a pretty thorough issues list by our next work session and then progress it from there on work session meeting. And probably, kind of update our timeline chart each month.
Great. And do these, this timeline, it sounds like this is what would be expected. Is there an expected point at which, the finalized draft would be available publicly that we can sort of guess as to when we'd like to have that as soon as possible, of course, but.
I'll defer to our chair or anyone else, but in my mind, we need to sort of identify what needs to be done before we can, go for a long range timeline. And I think that if we had a fulsome issues list by the next time we met, I would be satisfied with that. And then we would have a better chance to take a look at what's on the list and,
Sure.
where to go from there.
Yeah, I agree, Seamus, because we really don't know the amount of work that needs to be done yet. But I think once we have a complete list and we can assign those things off and know how long it's going to take to complete each of those items, we can make a more, educated assessment of what the timeline would be past the work session. But what you put together here, I think is a great structure for us to work from moving forward. But as Seamus said, we'll update it at, I think the next work session, we can really set some solid dates around things.
Great. And, just to end with one last comment here, is that I understand part of the LWRP formation was developed from grant funding that the village obtained. So that is something that we'll need to look into in terms of the requirements there, and if they are affected by any kind of a timeline. So that is something we will need to get back to you on.
All right, thank you so much, Seamus and Martin, for taking this and running with it. This only moves forward if somebody agrees to sort of take ownership of it, and both of you have just sort of grabbed onto this and moved it forward. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I think that's probably all we have on LWRP, and we can move to the next agenda item, which is our revised wetlands law. And we keep putting it on the agenda as the freshwater wetlands law, and that's no longer what the draft actually reflects. So in the last version that went around, one of the changes was to the title. It's now a wetlands and water bodies law, not a freshwater wetlands law. Other than that, there were not a lot of changes to the draft. The major open issue was that we seem to be missing a definition for wetlands and water bodies that had appeared in a previous draft, and I reincorporated that. We also had we've looked at the tree law, which isn't final, but in some version in some form is going to be final. And I think we all recognize that while there's some work to do on that, the work to do around that has to do with dangerous trees, inspection, and private property rights. What I don't think was controversial was the definition of clear cutting there. We had a different one. So instead I incorporated the proposed tree law definition of clear cutting. So I emailed all this around to the commissioner so you'd have a chance to look at it in advance on I think Monday night, so everybody have an opportunity to look at it. And with those fairly discrete changes, I think we have ourselves a draft that we can decide if we want to forward to the Board of Trustees for their consideration as our new wetlands and water bodies law. And Lisa, I know you're joining this conversation in the middle. This has gone around a bunch and got shelved and brought back. What we do is recommend it to the Board of Trustees, and then they consider it and vote it. And when they consider public law that will affect any of the areas we have jurisdiction over, we consider it and give them comments. So with that, I'll open it up to anybody who's reviewed the last draft and wants to make any comments.
No comments from me. I was looking to close the technical issue on the wetland water course buffer definition, which appears to have been done.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think you've closed all the loops.
Okay, then I think we have a vote. Then I'm going to move the adoption of this as our proposed wetlands and water bodies law, chapter 192, for consideration by the Board of Trustees. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is that, just a question, is that wetlands and water courses?
Water courses. I
No, I
misspoke. Wetlands and water courses. Thank you, David. So I don't think I missed anybody. Oh, Andrew, you're on mute and your camera's off.
Yes, I did say aye to that vote, Thomas.
Okay.
The camera's off because I have a bad case of hat head. I was cold. I was outside today and my hair is going in several different directions. I apologize for that.
Not arguing. I just needed to
Well, we can't
make
tell.
sure your vote was recorded. I never have that problem. Okay, so we have a unanimous pass. So we can move on from our chapter 192. We have as our next agenda item the consistency determination on the block grant. And there are two of these. One of them is the East Prospect and Waverly restoration of the sidewalks, and the other is the repairs to the exterior of 1110 Franklin. I think let's so these were two draft letters that I wanted to discuss briefly, and they're up on the agenda as discussion drafts. Did folks have a chance to look at these?
I did look at them.
I printed mine out, but I don't have it with me for some reason.
Just make sure that I've got.
Was there anything new since our work session?
Well, the drafts were a little different than what I expected, which is why they're up as discussion drafts. And you know, life being what it is, instead of turning around a counter draft, I just pass them along to make sure that I have that everybody's looking at these the same way that I am. We have. I'm sorry. I'm just taking a second to pull this up. The sidewalk one essentially says this is consistent, except that we caution that best management practices are important because this is so close to the brook in some places, and therefore construction management and stormwater management practices during the construction project itself are paramount. Which, I mean, I think that's what we talked about, and I'm not sure we need to say any more than that. So I think we are probably fine with that letter. I am fine with the Waverly and Prospect sidewalk letter. I had envisioned something else for 1110 Franklin, because the letter that the draft letter we're looking at essentially explains how it should be typed as a secret action, and that we think it's a good idea overall and therefore should be done. And that's not, I think, what we agreed to say. I think what we agreed to say is that the proposal as the concept is put forward sounds right and is consistent with our policies, but that we do consistency based on plans with, you know, site plans, and that some or any of the steps taken either in the plan or in the construction could raise issues for us, so it has to come back. And that, you know, the idea that you just tell us generally what you want to do and we sign off is just not not consistent with our process. And the letter doesn't say that. So I wanted to make sure that folks agreed with me that, you know, that letter doesn't express our views as a commission, that our view as a commission is that the concept as put forth is not a complete application. The concept is consistent with our policies, but that's not how we review it. We do consistency based on plans. Here's how you do it. You bring it back to planning and us, and if planning doesn't have to review it, you bring it straight to us. We consider it for consistency based on an actual site plan, a completed CAF, et cetera. And we can advise about issues, but we can't find consistency without that. That's what I think the letter ought to say.
Yeah.
Am I going sideways on that, or is that the view of the commission?
Yeah, I agree completely.
I agree with that.
Yeah, that was the main issue during the work session too, is that there aren't any plans. So, you know, we're basically guessing on an idea, you know, so.
Okay.
On both fronts, you've articulated exactly my thoughts. Yep.
All right, we're all on the same page then. I think we're good with the sidewalk letter. I am going to circulate a draft by realistically 3 p.m. tomorrow. I can get it done. But certainly by close of business tomorrow, I can get everybody a redrafted proposed letter, comments straight back to me, because we can't deliberate outside the opening meetings context. So you can't loop everybody in. Comments back to me, and I'll centralize them, and then we'll get a letter out Friday morning on the house renovation community development block grant. And we're not going to take any more time than we have to, or give them any harder a time than we have to, because we're glad to see CDBG work being done again. It's great. I just think they misconstrue the process. We have to explain how it works. We will deal with their application as speedily as we are able. They come back to us with a set of plans. We'll consider it right away. We'll tell them if something needs to be changed or reconsidered, and we'll get it considered as quickly as we can. But we don't erase our process. Martin?
Yeah, just a quick thing, Chairman Burt. So we had also discussed with these sidewalks about the possibility of them, you know, maybe doing a strip of grass along the side or things like that to work as you know, rain garden type control of stormwater runoff and things like that from the permeable surfaces. Do we need to include that in this letter, or do we wait until we get the plans to make those types of suggestions? I mean, I feel we could be a little preemptive on some of those things, maybe.
Might be smart. And that's an easy edit to the letter. So I'll deal with both of those letters the same way. I'll have them out as early in the afternoon as I'm able tomorrow for comment. I think we all understand how, you know, there won't be much of an edit on the sidewalk one. The house one, you'll see. If you got comments, you'll let me know.
One piece of follow-up. It would be better to put that in the letter at this time, because technically the state and the county need the consistency determination, not for the project, but to be able to use federal money for a project. So I would definitely advise you, if you have any specific concerns, comments, suggestions, put that in the commentary. As far as the sidewalks, I did present this to the board on Monday night. I let them know of the meeting that was held last week, and the general guidelines you had mentioned, and the board was supportive of that, and you know, was going to echo and adopt your comments as part of the official village comments back to the state.
Terrific. Thank you, and I'll turn it around tomorrow. And with that, we have run through all 4 of our live administrative agenda items. We have minutes. Because of the press of other business, I was unable to spend much time with the July 15 minutes. I don't want to vote on those tonight because I haven't given them a careful read. If there's real pressure to do so, I suppose we could deal with that, but I don't think we need to. All right. Is there any other business we have to attend to?
Thomas, can I go back to LWRP for a quick second?
Sure.
As I sit here and I think about some of the past applications and past experiences, is it possible, again, I want to review the 44 policies we have, but is it possible to suggest 2, maybe 3 additional policies? I work on some language. Is that something we can do?
That's a much more complicated, proposition than it might look like on the surface. We didn't draft the 44 policies back in 1984 out of thin air. We took 44 from the enabling legislation. There's the authority for an LWRP waterfalls from the federal enabling statute to the state, and from the state to the municipality. And we adopted the format that was then current in the enabling statute all the way down. That's why we have these empty policies, the policy numbers that are left open, because those are for policies that didn't apply to our community, but were in the format. Everybody follows the same format. We had a little bit of a discussion earlier on about the 13 Long Island Sound format, and we don't pick these out of a hat. We either follow the 44 format or the 13 format. New ones follow the 13 format if they're on Sound Shore Community, and the live question for us is whether we have to change to follow the new format. I don't know that we have the authority to just go outside the existing policies and pick our own. I would, and we would need to step very carefully legally, because we would be, first of all, we'd be drafting policies that don't map the state, and we'd also be drafting policies that had no history of interpretation or enforcement. So we'd sort of be on our own doing that. So the short answer is that's a big deal. That'd be a big deal. I don't know if we even can, and if we can, we should think carefully before we do.
Thomas, would a middle ground be, could we, incorporate Andrew's thoughts into the narrative, the full LWRP, document to sort of guide in, application or interpretation of our policies in some way?
That my understanding is that we can do, and we have now 40 years of developed thinking about what these policies mean. So in our interpretive text and how we think about them, there are things that we know that we think that aren't in the language of the policy, but that we know we think, and we say to every applicant. How many times in the last 2 years have we said, if you're going to do work in the wetland buffer, you need to be able to build us a record that says that there will be no adverse impact on the wetlands from the work in the buffer. That is a settled understanding before this commission. That kind of stuff, in my view, belongs in interpretive text. I don't think we can draft policies from scratch, but we can certainly put down in our explanatory text how we see the policies.
Yeah, so I think, okay, what I think I'll do is I will circulate an email to everyone with 2 or 3 issues and a basis as to why I'm thinking about this. And then if we can incorporate, they don't have to be policies, they could just be incorporated anywhere. But just as we were on this call, I have 2 or 3 things that I think might be helpful. And I'll frame them, I'll put the basis, I'll tell you where they came from, and then let everyone digest them and see where maybe we can work them in if they're acceptable.
Yeah, Andrew, why don't we put it on our issues list, and we can use that as a tool to kind of track things that we want to incorporate or update, et cetera.
Okay, great.
You sort of get one free one circulating to everybody. After that, it becomes deliberation, where even in correspondence, we're limited by open meetings law. So we can't, I'm just reminding everybody that we can't have a free-form discussion about it by email, because that would be circumventing open meetings.
And Andrew could even send it to me directly. I could put it on the issues list we develop, and then we could, talk about it on our next work session.
Sub-quorum group constitutes a work group, and work groups are free to work without holding an open meeting. So you can workshop it with Seamus and Martin. without, without fear that you then have to publish it. When it gets to the point where we want to talk about it as a commission with a quorum, it should be in a form that can go up on the agenda and we have a public discussion. Public
will
gets to
Andrew
see our
start?
work. That goes with the gig.
But
Okay.
will Andrew circulate the policies that he was referring to? That would be helpful.
Yeah, I think what I was thinking, David, is we're going to create a document that's hopefully as narrow as possible for our next work session, and it will be on there.
The only thing I would request, because I run into a timing issue sometimes because if I'm away, but if we could just get that in advance, like at least 5 to 6 days in advance of the work session.
Yeah, I mean, I practically with just this one, interim that we have coming up between the holidays and then when our next work session is, I'm not positive about that, but certainly endeavor to do the best.
Okay.
Work with Amber and everyone's time frames. Yeah.
Great.
When is the next work session?
12th.
112.
112. Okay.
So David, I'm with you. I appreciate getting things in ample time to be able to review it. So since I'm on this committee with Seamus, we will both.
Yeah, my problem is.
We'll both try our best to get it to you as soon as possible.
I find that if they come too close to the meeting, I just read them to go to the meeting as opposed to
you
read
don't
them
have enough time
and
to
kind
actually
of go through a
absorb it.
thought process with it, to, kind of internally think about it, then go back. And unfortunately, it's just, we all have crazy schedules these days with where we are, remote, not remote.
Everything's disrupted.
It is
Everything's disrupted.
very disruptive.
However, we seem to have chunked through much of the administrative backlog that we were looking at this fall. We've moved past a lot of these things, and depending on what the applicant workload looks like in the spring, we may have the freedom to lighten up on the work session. So you've all been great about volunteering your time to do an additional work session every month. For the last 3 months, it's worked, in my view, great to get this backlog down.
Agreed.
We can always decide that there comes a time when we don't need to do that. I'm not imposing it on anybody except on the basis of need. So
I would support anything that eliminates an after midnight end of a meeting. I'm all for.
The reason we started that is because I can't think reasonably about policy stuff after we've done 4 applicants, and it's getting close to, getting to be 11:30. I can't, I know several of you can't, and these things deserve real attention. Everybody's been great this fall getting through this stuff. We got very backlogged. We got very busy. You've all put in a lot of effort to getting us back to a place where I think we have a reasonable, manageable set of stuff in front of us. Thank you. All right, so I think we have run the agenda. So I'm going to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 A blessedly short meeting. Thank you, folks.
Have a happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays and be safe.
Happy holidays.
Welcome, Lisa.
Yeah, welcome, Lisa.
Bye, Lisa.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.